It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, our oldest son, Dr. Ted Suzelis, naturopathic doctor, who has an office in Boardman. And once we get back to our other building, I think that he said that he will be coming back to Newton Falls on occasion. So I'm excited for that myself. But he will be speaking today on overcoming fatigue naturally. Thank you, and help me.
All right, so we're going to talk about a little more focus than Dr. Ian. He did a great job of giving a nice big overview on a lot of different things. I'm going to try to keep it a little more focused, although I'll probably go off track and talk about a lot of other things too. Let's see how we work this slideshow. There we go. So, the topic is overcoming fatigue naturally. But to be honest, I'm going to be focusing on energy production and not even talking necessarily much about fatigue. So, of course, it's the same. Two sides of the same thing. It's the glass half full or the glass half empty, and it's one thing to think about fatigue and the health issues that are going along with it, and it's another thing to figure out how you can overcome that fatigue and make the energy you need so that you can function properly. Okay, so our main premise here is we eat food, and the goal of our body is to make it into energy. And that's really the number one goal of our whole existence, really. And that even goes back around. It's a cycle. I mean, we need energy so that our bodies can survive. And so over time, of course, we have plentiful food now, but 100 years, and farther back, that was more of a struggle. And so that's where most activity focused around obtaining that food so you can make energy. Well, once you have the energy, then it goes to trying to get more food. And so it's a cycle, and that's really one of the most important things in our body. And that's also why fatigue is, I said I wasn't going to say that, but that's why fatigue is an issue with so many people, because it is integral in basically everything that happens in our body. So we're going to focus more though on, I'm going to start out with talking about how our bodies actually utilize food and make it into energy. And this could be a 10-year dissertation on how that happens. I'm going to distill it down into a couple of minutes. So we have three basic phases of converting food into energy. First is digestion and absorption of that food. Then the breakdown of our macronutrients. Macronutrients are the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And then conversion of glucose into ATP. Now, so that breakdown of those macronutrients is to make glucose, to make sugar. We'll go through that more. And then the conversion of that glucose that we put into our blood into ATP, which ATP is our body's currency for energy. And that happens in the mitochondria. So we're going to cover all three of these phases and talk about all the vitamins and everything that are involved. So the first phase, digestion and absorption. So of course, number one, eat nutritious foods. We can't expect to eat junk that doesn't have nutrients and expect it's going to make good energy or keep us healthy. Where I normally spend most of my time talking about how to eat nutritious and healthy, today we're not focusing on that. And then, we need to have a healthy digestive tract so that we can absorb those nutrients. And so with that, we need adequate amounts of stomach acid to digest proteins, to break them down. And of course, unfortunately, a lot of conventional medicine, whenever anybody has any digestive problems, they look at drugs to reduce stomach acid. That's, sometimes that's important. A lot of other times there are other things going on that you don't really need those medications to, that people don't necessarily have enough stomach acid, but we won't go into that necessarily. But nonetheless, stomach acid is one of our first important things to help break down proteins. Then we have digestive enzymes that help to break down our foods, the proteins, fats, and the carbohydrates. Then bile. Bile is produced in the liver, and it gets stored in the gallbladder. And so a lot of people don't understand the gallbladder, and a lot of people have it taken out. A lot of doctors think it doesn't really serve much of a purpose, and that it's not a big deal to get it just cut out whenever anybody's having a slight little symptom. But basically the gallbladder is a storage sac. Think of it like a balloon. And our liver makes bile to break down fats, and then the liver, pumps that bile into the gallbladder, which stores that bile. And then when we eat fatty foods, the gallbladder contracts, pushing that bile into our small intestine so that we can have a nice amount of that bile to break down the fats. If you get your gallbladder removed, then you can't necessarily have such a large amount of bile at one time when you have a fatty meal. And that can lead into a lot of different digestive problems for people after they have their gallbladder removed, or if they're having gallbladder disease and aren't able to do that otherwise too. And then the last component of that would be probiotic bacteria, which those are everybody's heard of probiotics, and it's talked about ad nauseum on TV and here and there and everywhere. But they're basically good bacteria that we need in our digestive tract to help us to break down our foods, utilize our nutrients. And as much as you hear about them, we are just on the very beginning cusp of really understanding these bugs and how important they are in the body. And it's going to take a long, we're starting to understand them better, and in the next probably 20 years, we're hopefully we'll have enough information to where we can actually look at probiotic use as a much bigger portion of health and healing in our bodies, helping us, helping all kinds of different health issues. I mean, from there's been look at certain probiotics that in certain, in mice, given the right probiotics, that can change around autism. They can help with fighting different types of infections, which could then be important when we're looking at all these antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria. So there's, it's going to be something that we're going to see more and more of over the next probably 20 or 30 years, and hopefully it'll be a great thing. You never know with research. There's lots of research happens, and then we find out, okay, the research is nice, but we can't necessarily put it into practice to have help with healing. Hopefully, we'll be able to do that better and much more efficiently. So that second phase, that metabolic breakdown of the nutrients. So the goal of this process is to break down the macronutrients, like I said, the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, into glucose to feed the cells of our body. And Cheryl, you asked about sugar. This is where the sugar fits in. So, like I said, our body needs these macronutrients to get broken down, and they turn into glucose. Our body puts that glucose into our bloodstream to feed all of our cells. And so when we ingest carbohydrates, that's the closest to glucose. In fact, glucose is a carbohydrate. And so with that, carbohydrates are able, when we eat them, and we eat large amounts of them, our bodies are able to metabolize them quickly, put that, make glucose, put it into our bloodstream, and raise our blood sugar. Well, you can only do that so long. You eat, say, a piece of cake, and it's going to break down quickly, your blood sugar is going to spike, but then you run out of those carbohydrates, and your blood sugar drops because you don't have anything left. And then that causes fatigue. and and will then cause you to have sugar cravings and want to go to that next sweet, so that we can ride that roller coaster all day long between fatigue and energy. So fats and proteins take a lot more time to break down in our body. It's a lot more complex conversion. And so what that means is, like say, protein is really important for helping us to get our blood sugar stabilized. Where carbohydrates go into our system real quickly, proteins take a lot longer to break down. So you could look at, a good estimate is about 4 hours to really break down a protein source. So where the carbohydrates go in and out quickly, say within a half hour or something potentially, the proteins are going to be breaking down for 4 hours. So even if you have some carbohydrates with those proteins, your blood sugar might, spike, but it can't bottom out so easily because you're still making energy. So this is where vitamins come in, and I have a lot of information here. I'm not expecting you guys to understand it all, but I just, it's nice to have a place to sort of, in your mind, understand where vitamins fit in. Because in this process of breaking down the carbohydrates, but more so the proteins and the fats, and making energy, our body needs all of these different B vitamins. They're very important in that process. So you can see I have B1 all the way through B12 as these different nutrients that are important in that conversion of our macronutrients into glucose. And one of the, I would say some of the most important ones in that process, definitely vitamin B3 niacin, and especially in this form of NAD+. So I'm not going to cover necessarily all of these things, but this NAD+ is a very important thing in our body's production of energy. And a lot of research over the last 20 years has been to figure out how we can give niacin or other precursors to this NAD+ to help us to make energy more efficiently. Also, there's been research in type 1 diabetes, in things like Parkinson's disease and Huntington's disease and chronic fatigue, a lot of different areas where they've been looking at trying to figure out how we can make more of this NAD, because we know that if we can make more of that, that's sort of a limiting step in the whole process of energy. And so it's really important. So I would say that's the number one, but all of these different nutrients need to be, to happen. And then we also talk about, I'm going to cover a little bit later, but I also just want to talk, to sort of, touch on it, where it says vitamin B6, and it says pyridoxine. So pyridoxine hydrochloride is the chemical name of the vitamin B6 that you see in pretty much all of your vitamin supplements. And that's, the form that's in most of our foods. But our body has to convert that pyridoxine hydrochloride into a different active form of vitamin B6 called pyridoxal 5-phosphate. Or sometimes it'll just be written down pyridoxal phosphate. And there can be different reasons why we can't necessarily break that B6 down into that active form as well as we should. It can be different genetic weaknesses that, certain enzymes are lacked in our body that we don't produce enough of to be able to make that, conversion easy. There's also, it can happen in our digestive tract with the bacteria in the digestive tract. That can be another piece of that where we can't necessarily break down that pyridoxine into the pyridoxal 5-phosphate well enough. And then we have things like folic acid, where we're starting to much better understand the genetics there, and we're even testing different genetic markers for folic acid metabolism. And where it's most established is in pregnancy, where some people have a genetic deficiency, or mutation in their genes where they can't convert that folic acid into a form of folic acid called 5-MTHF. 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. And so you can get supplement forms to, of that 5-MTHF, or another one called folinic acid that can help to bridge that gap so that your body can get the active form and sort of bypass that enzymatic defect in the body so that everything can work properly. So it's not just in pregnancy and miscarriages, but also it'll be a factor in energy production, also different mental health issues. You might, if you haven't already, start hearing, people, are starting to talk more about methylation defects. And, this is a part of really detoxification, but also just breaking down vitamin B12 properly and folic acid in order to make nutrients in the body. And it can have big effects in a whole wide host of different health issues that we don't have time to go into right now. But we have all those B vitamins and then lipoic acid that are intimately involved in this conversion of all the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats into glucose to make energy. And then oxygen is also an important part too. And oxygen isn't necessarily needed 100% of the time. So say for instance, somebody is an athlete, or anybody doing exercise. You have two different parts of energy production, aerobic and anaerobic. So the aerobic is what works really well with our bodies, and we can make energy we have plenty of oxygen real well. Well, once you start fatiguing yourself, your body can't get that that oxygen into the cells as well, and so you have to rely on anaerobic respiration or metabolism, and so that doesn't work anywhere near as efficiently. So that's a big issue with people having, with athletes or anybody, as far as helping to produce energy to sustain activity. And that's where a big place where things like heart disease and lung disease, affect energy production. That's why people that their heart's not, they have heart problems, they have problems getting that blood flow through the heart into the cells of all our bodies. So, not only so you don't get the nutrients, but also the oxygen too. And the same with the lungs. You have some kind of chronic bronchitis or other, COPD issues, then you can't get the lung into, you can't get the oxygen into the blood to get to the rest of the body as well. So that's where those things fit in. And also, Dr. Ian was talking about anemia. And, we know that iron deficiency and B12 deficiency and folic acid deficiency and B6 deficiency will cause changes in our blood cells. And that's what they see when you do a CBC, and somebody will, doctor will say you're anemic because your red blood count is low. And so that's where they're looking at those red blood cells, and you're not making enough red blood cells. But, those actual anemia issues, a lot of that is that, you don't have those nutrients to make the blood cells to shuttle those nutrients throughout the body. But then also, it's the fact that you don't have those nutrients involved to be able to get to the cells. So, just looking at a different piece of these, things like anemia. And then we're in that third phase where glucose is processed in the mitochondria of our cells to produce energy. And so this funny bean-looking thing is the mitochondria. We have these in all of the cells of our body, and that is what has been sort of nicknamed the powerhouse of our cells, because without these mitochondria, we cannot make energy. And mitochondria are really interesting and different, because these are almost, it's part of every cell, but it's actually almost like its own little organism that's sort of symbiotically working with us, because these mitochondria actually have their own DNA, different from our regular genetic code, and the mitochondria only get passed down from our mothers. So it's something that doesn't happen from the father. So it's totally different. It's almost like a whole separate organism like a bacteria or something that has come into our cells, and it works symbiotically with us to make energy. And so, like I'm trying to pull all this together, this information together. So we make the glucose. It goes into our bloodstream to all of our cells, and then that glucose in our cells gets broken down through a step of phases in order to help us produce energy, or ATP is the actual currency, like I said earlier. And so that's what it's all about as far as energy production. And so, this is oxidative phosphorylation is the actual process in the mitochondria to help us to make energy. And I put a diagram here that goes through that oxidative phosphorylation. We do not need to go over that. It's more just to give you something to look at. But then we also need some other vitamins that are really important in this piece too. So we need the niacin for that NAD, also riboflavin, which is vitamin B2, because it makes another nutrient called FAD, ubiquinol, which is a form of coenzyme Q10, and then panathine, which is vitamin B5. And these are all important to help us, in those mitochondria to make energy. So, say for instance, somebody is on a cholesterol medication, and they start feeling fatigued or get muscle cramps or things. The reason why people have those symptoms when they're on a statin drug that lowers cholesterol is because it works on an enzyme, in the liver to slow down cholesterol production, but that same enzyme also works to help us to make coenzyme Q10. So, we don't, so the cholesterol medications can then cause a reduction in coenzyme Q10 levels, which then doesn't allow us to make energy properly. And so that's where we can get fatigue, but also muscle pains, because then the muscles can't make the energy they need to function properly. So some people can, if they really need those statin drugs, they can take, large amounts of this, coenzyme Q10 and help overcome some of those side effects. But there's a newer form over the last few years, maybe 5 or 6 years especially, this ubiquinol, which is the active form of CoQ10 that works much more efficiently. And milligram to milligram, they say it's probably somewhere, depending on the person and how they break down CoQ10 into this ubiquinol, maybe like 6 to 8 times more potent per milligram. It's also more expensive too in a supplement form, but it can be very important in helping us to make energy. So let's talk about some of the problems in this whole thing. One is genetics, and so the genetic portion, this is what gets really interesting. The conventional medical community, likes to think of everybody as the same. And, we want to find a drug that works on everybody the same to help, get rid of a symptom. But they don't recognize that we are all different and that we have differences. And this is where genetics is starting to pull that together to understand what these genetic differences are. And so one of these, big issues with, say, energy production is that we can have genes that make a certain enzyme in the body that helps convert some of these different nutrients. Like I talked about the vitamin B6, but also in the whole cascade of different reactions that happen, there can be blocks in certain enzymes in certain areas that don't allow us to actually make energy properly. And these aren't enzymes that we can just take a digestive enzyme and have it work. These are in our cells that we don't have a way to just supplement that enzyme and correct that deficiency. So this is where we look at overcoming some of those defects and working around it so that our bodies can work more efficiently. And so, when you hear conventional medicine, and on TV and everything, they talk about how you shouldn't bother to take vitamins because most people, if they eat, enough healthy foods, they're going to get enough of those vitamins. Our food supply isn't as full of these vitamins as it was, say, 100 years ago. But B, some of us have some of these genetic deficiencies. That means that we need certain vitamins in a much higher dose to actually have the same effect that it would have on somebody else. And so that's where even measuring vitamin levels doesn't actually give us an idea of the effectiveness of certain vitamins, supplementing them too. That's why with these B vitamins, if you look on the back of the bottle of B vitamins, you'll see the RDA percentages, and they're huge. Like B12, you have 1,000 micrograms of B12, and it's something like 8,300% of the RDA. Well, there's a couple of things there. For one, like I said, some people just need a lot more than others in order to overcome some of these defects, their genetic defects that their body has. But also, the RDA is very woefully inadequate as far as giving us actual needs of these vitamins. Say, for instance, vitamin C. I can't remember exactly what the RDA is. I think it's like 60 milligrams a day. Well, that 60 milligrams is just enough so that we don't develop scurvy. Well, we don't really have any issues with scurvy at this point in time in our history. But we understand that vitamin C works in a lot of different other areas of the body, and that we need a lot higher amounts. Like, say, vitamin D is another one. You look at when doctors do blood tests for vitamin D, and the range in the blood test is usually about 30 to 100. And if it's above 30, medical doctor says it's fine, or it's around that. It's fine because that's enough vitamin D to help us absorb calcium so that we can keep our bones strong. Well, we're understanding over the last 10 years or so that there are a lot of other functions of vitamin D that we really want to have higher levels of that vitamin D in our body. Like, for instance, for fighting viral infections. Vitamin D is really important, including the flu. A lot of people, if they have high vitamin D levels, they are able to fight off the flu a lot better. Some might not get it at all. Others will, it'll be a much milder case. Also, with a lot of different types of cancer, high vitamin D levels will help us to, either, help, reduce our risks for, and sometimes even help, improve our outcomes with certain types of cancers. Like, for instance, there's some research that has showed that for breast cancer, high vitamin D levels can cut your risk by about 40%. That's significant, for something that's so inexpensive. And then there's just been, in the last few months, some other research that was released that showed that vitamin D could potentially be effective in helping to improve breast cancer outcomes. So, when we talk about these vitamins, and you can't look at that RDA on the back of the bottle because it just doesn't, it doesn't give us reality. Okay, so that's a soapbox that I'm going to get off of now, and we'll go on. So we talked a little bit about this genetics and why some people need more of these certain vitamins than others. There's different types of toxins that can affect our bodies that doesn't allow us to make energy as well as we need to. Certain drugs, and we talked about the cholesterol medications and how that affects it. But other drugs can cause trouble with our energy because of some of the metabolic effects that it's having. But also other chemicals in our environment, whether it's pesticides and herbicides, or heavy metals, or a whole wide variety of other chemicals that might be used in different industries that can, our bodies, for some people, they're more sensitive, and their livers can't detoxify those chemicals as well, and they'll build up and can cause a lot more of these issues. The third one, I said not enough substrate. So substrate is a chemistry term for meaning not enough of, say, the building blocks. So if you want to build a sand castle, you need plenty of sand. So the sand would be the substrate. And so if you don't have enough the proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, of course you can't make enough energy. Or if you don't have enough of the vitamins, you can't make enough energy. Same with oxygen too, same thing. So we need to make sure we have adequate amount of these different nutrients so that we can make the energy. And then a whole other, we could go on a whole other lecture on other problems with, regulating the body and producing energy that goes along with brain chemicals and hormones. And Dr. Ian talked a lot about the thyroid and adrenal glands and diabetes and being overweight and all these different things that will affect our energy levels. And then of course we can't not talk about some of these lifestyle factors too. And Dr. Ian definitely covered some of those pretty well too, as far as he really covered the sleep end of things well, because if you don't get enough sleep, you can't have enough energy. Exercise, very important energy production. And everybody, if you're inactive, you have chronic fatigue or different issues, stress issues or different things, you have to work on it. And just like Dr. Ian said about the gait exercising, you start at a certain amount of time and you build up little by little as your body can tolerate. You don't want to push yourself necessarily too hard and then have, collapse and have sort of a much bigger relapse of your fatigue or other issues going on. You have to work on it so that you can move forward without suffering consequences. And then of course food sensitivities. And Dr. Ian talked about this, touched on this a little bit, but different foods definitely can, eating the wrong foods can cause allergy problems and sensitivity problems that don't allow us to make energy properly and cause us to feel fatigued and sedated. Okay, so now we want to talk about the fun stuff. And so this is a supplement here, this nicotinamide-ribose, that I actually just came into contact with in the last 2 weeks. And it's actually really just come on the market in the last month, a couple of months too. And this is a supplement that actually helps us to make that NAD that I was talking about, and how all this research has gone into trying to find different ways of supplementing vitamin B3 and different forms of that to make more NAD, including another nutrient, ribose, which is in the name. So nicotinamide is actually a form of vitamin B3. The same form of vitamin B3 is also known as niacinamide. And then the ribose, D-ribose has been used more recently to help in fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and different things to help with energy production. But it's just, a lot of these products just haven't worked out anywhere near as well as they should. But this one seems to be a bit different, and I'm one that usually tends to be very reserved, and people that have, that are my patients in the audience know that I tend to really hold back when new things get released, and make sure, and let other people sort of play with it and sort of figure out whether it's going to be something good or not, because you're bombarded with 50 new, different products a year that are supposedly the end-all, cure-all to, to weight loss and this and that and the other. So I usually stay away, except for this was one sort of piqued my interest with the research that was showing. And so last week I had my office manager order me a bottle. And so I'm a runner, and I run usually at least 3 times a week, and I'll do a 10K, so about just over 6 miles when I do a run. And I do that run in typically about 53 or 54 minutes. So, just over 8.5-minute miles. And so the first time I took this nicotinamide-ribose was about a half hour before my run last Friday morning. And got into my system and I started running, and things felt a little different. I was feeling a lot more energetic, and it was much easier and much more effortless, and I actually cut my time by about 3 minutes off, 3 or 4 minutes off that normal pace. So where I normally about 53, 54 minutes, I end up running about 50, just over 50 minutes, for that 6-mile run. Which it doesn't sound necessarily a huge amount, but when you talk about when I'm normally running 8.5 to 9-minute miles, and I cut it down to right about 8, just over 8-minute miles, that's definitely significant. Then the next day, I don't normally run 2 days in a row on the road because it's just too hard on my body. But I was all excited about this, so I decided I was going to go out on Saturday, which was a nice day too. And I actually cut an extra 30 seconds off of the whole time too. So I brought my, for the first time ever in about, I've been running for about 5 years. Actually, I cut down under 50 minutes. Actually, I take that back, I lied. There was one other time that I had run under 50 minutes doing that same 6-mile course. And that was probably about 4 years ago.
Was someone chasing you?
No, I was
thinking dog.
I was talking to an athletic trainer, and she was trying to encourage me to push harder. That maybe I just wasn't pushing hard enough to get where I was going. So I was very really pushed myself hard, and I got under 50 minutes then. But that crashed my adrenals, and the next 3 months I almost couldn't run. I had to sort of build back up out of it. It was just too much. Where this time was totally different. After a couple of days, I did another run, and it wasn't quite as fast because my muscles hadn't recovered well enough. But I still had the the mental and the physical energy to do it. Just the muscles need to get stronger to be able to sustain that level of exercise. So it's something that I'm really, really encouraged about, and I think it's going to be something that's going to be really helpful. A lot of the sort of talk out there, and of course you can't necessarily listen to all of the talk, but they're looking at this as one of the major advancements in the nutritional industry over the next decade. And so, it helps us to make energy, but also the molecule that this makes, this NAD, also works to help make, do a lot of different other things in the body that we might see other good benefits. Like, for instance, helps to make dopamine, the neurotransmitter dopamine, and also other catecholamine neurotransmitters like epinephrine and norepinephrine. And so it could be helping with, things like I talked about, the Parkinson's research. Also just mood issues, addictions. A lot of different things on that end could pan out to be really good. It's also important for fat metabolism and utilization. So, we may find that this is something that helps to improve weight loss. It's too early for me to even make any promises with that because I have no clue. But, it helps us to make some of these molecules in the body that might prove to be really important there. So I have 2 different bottles here because there's only 2 different companies that make this product right now. One is a professional company called Thorne, and so I typically only use these doctor-only brands. And then this other company that makes this Niagen. This is a sports nutrition company, hence the flashy, sort of intense, type looking bottle. But both companies, the product comes from the same, the actual nutrient actually comes from the same manufacturer. They just put it in a capsule. And where the retail price of the Thorne product is $59 per month supply, the retail price for this other one is $48, so $11 difference. So, in general, it's expensive, but for a lot of people, it could be, something that really helps, sort of helps to build their energies and helps them recover from a lot of health issues. And then I want to talk about a couple of other nutrients. So we talked about coenzyme Q10 and how important that is to make energy in the mitochondria. So, supplemental form of that CoQ10, the ubiquinol is the important one to really help with the metabolism. And you want 50 to 200 milligrams a day. That's another one that can get expensive too. And then the other thing is just the B vitamins. So whether it's a B complex or a multivitamin that has the active forms of these different B vitamins, and I have a couple listed there, could be really good, and a good sublingual vitamin B12. B12, is a nutrient that can be a lot more, difficult to absorb in the body. You need certain cofactors, including enough stomach acid, to be able to absorb coenzyme Q10. You need this molecule called intrinsic factor. And so some people, especially people with lower stomach acid levels, can have more trouble absorbing vitamin B12 that way. So we have these sublingual methods of absorption where you just have a lozenge that you let dissolve onto your tongue, and it'll get absorbed into the blood the veins underneath the tongue, and get into our bodies a lot quicker and easier. So then that can help too. And there's a lot of different forms of vitamin B12 too. The two active forms, you've heard about methylcobalamin, some people, and that's one of the main ones that you see right now. And that works really well to get into the brain and to help things on that end. But this other form that's been out a long time, in fact I used to use it probably close to 25 years ago in high school during football, this adenosylcobalamin. It's a different form of vitamin B12 that actually helps a lot more with energy production. And so, I'm looking at getting that more into my practice to be able to help people. And so my goal with these nutrients, because this all gets expensive. You put all these recommendations down together. You could be looking at $120 or $130 a month. But I'm actually looking at trying to, over the next few weeks, trying to sort of pull it together, do a little bit of volume buying and, put it together in daily convenience packs where you have, everything together in your own, own little blister pack. So you have your morning and your afternoon dose of things. And trying to get that down, I probably should be able to get that down to about $100 per month supply, which is still a lot of money, but for some people to help really build their energy if you're really suffering, it could be something that could really work well. And of course, the more you heal and get better, the less of these things you're going to need too. So just want to open up to questions. Jim?
What about whole food supplements like Garden of Life and Vitamin Code, and the big push on using those minuscule amounts of vitamins in some, bonded in some food content?
So the whole thing about these whole food vitamins is that there are other cofactors and co-nutrients that we haven't identified yet. That that getting nutrients out of from actual food, we could be getting some of these nutrients that we haven't necessarily identified. It helps us to utilize, say, our B vitamins or vitamin C or different things. The problem is, in reality, these supplements don't really necessarily give us any extra benefits. And it tends to, the companies that are out there tend to be a bit of a gimmick. I'm trying to think of the one brand.
There's Garden of Life, and then there's Vitamin Code.
Vitamin Code, I think, is the one that if you look on the bottle, it's sort of listed as a whole food supplement, but actually, if you look on where all the nutrients come from, they actually are manufactured by bacteria. Either bacteria or a fungus. It might be a fungus. Yeah. And so, so that's not necessarily a whole food source either. It's just, just a different way of manufacturing the vitamin, that one specific vitamin and putting it into a supplement. But it then has a lot lower dosage too. So it's not necessarily giving the co-nutrients that might be in whole foods that would help you. Also, one of the professional companies that a lot of chiropractors use, Standard Process, is that's been their whole marketing campaign for 30 or 40 years. Is that they're different because if it's a whole food supplement. Yet any of their supplements that actually need to have vitamins in a therapeutic dose, they slip that vitamin in under other ingredients. So like for instance, they have one, a vitamin B6 formula, it's called Linum B6. And so it actually has a therapeutic amount of vitamin B6 listed on the label. And when you look at the active ingredients, is all their typical extracts that they have. But then in other ingredients, it has listed pyridoxal hydrochloride, which is the chemical name for vitamin B6. So in general, I would say that these companies making these whole food supplements, it's a lot more of a gimmick than anything at this point. But when it comes down to it, no, vitamin supplements can't replace foods. And that's why it's important, it's important to take some of the vitamins, especially certain ones you need, and a good multivitamin to cover some of these basic nutrients. But then that doesn't excuse you from eating good, healthy foods, fruits and vegetables, to get those nutrients into your body so that you can get some of the cofactors that we might not have identified yet that can help us to utilize them and work better.
And please, another question for you. A couple. Food combining.
Yes.
I want to ask you, for years I've heard when people eat melon, like you go to buffets and they'll have the watermelon sitting out with, they have all the proteins out, vegetables, and they'll have all the melons sitting out. I heard that when you eat melon, you should eat it about 45 minutes away from the other foods because it drives the protein and everything out of your stomach or undigested because it breaks down so fast.
Well, as far as the food combining goes, it's about limiting limiting certain carbohydrates from proteins and whatnot. But our body is made to absorb and break down carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. In fact, a lot of foods have, there are some foods that have a fairly equal portion of all three of those. And so our bodies are made to break those down. Now, of course, if you're eating a ton of melon, you're looking at a lot of sugar, maybe a lot of, also watermelon has a lot of water in it to dilute your digestive enzymes and stuff. So eating a lot of that along with other stuff could possibly reduce your absorption and breakdown of the nutrients. But in general, I find that the food combining, it'll help some people it can be real helpful for some people to get away from certain digestive issues by eating those foods. But what I find is a lot more important is identifying food sensitivities or allergies that might be causing the digestive issue itself. And then I find once you eliminate the foods that are causing the actual problem, then you can absorb and break down the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats all together, and you don't have to worry about food combining. So it's really about getting to the root problem versus trying to find a Band-Aid so you can eat more of what you want, but just eat in the right sequence. Yes?
If you want to start out with a B complex,
Yes.
what's the strength you should take that should be okay?
Well, there's going to be all kinds of different ones.
Right.
If you're looking at just a real basic B complex, you usually find a good one that has 50 milligrams of all the different B vitamins. And 50 milligrams of, like, say, the B1, B2, B3, B6, and B5. And then when you talk about folic acid and B12, you're looking at micrograms versus milligrams. So you want about 1,000 micrograms of each of those.